Hello and welcome to another episode of Soul Nectar Show, that show where we talk about all things essence, where we gather around the campfire and we share our connection to that which is bigger than us, to the big mystery, to the divine truth, to, just the magic synchronicities that can happen in life when we unfold and realize that, hey, we're bigger than this body and this
Mhm.
physical thing. Like, we're so much bigger than that. I'm your host, Carrie Hummingbird, and I love realization. Realization is probably my favorite thing, because what happens with realization is that you become knowing a truth that's buried under a whole lot of lies and misinformation and distortion. And once you know that truth, you have that light bulb go off over your head, like, oh, I always knew that, but I forgot it. Dang, okay, I remember it again. And this is about remembering again. It's about remembering who you actually are in truth, not like who you thought you were, who you thought you had to be. Waking
Mm.
up to the truth within you. And I'm just so delighted to be in service in this way, to be helping, guiding people through this process of realization. I'm doing a bunch of things right now on that. One of them is called liberation. So if you're interested in liberation, go look at my website, carriehummingbird.com, Kerri, hummingbird.com. And of course, Butterfly Circle is the place we get all juicy and vulnerable, and we can cry and get angry and whatever else needs to happen. And we share our stories and we work through it together. So if that interests you, I welcome a conversation. So as usual, I have an amazing guest on the show today. I'm just so excited for the conversation we're about to have. I think it's going to help so many people right now who are in lockdown, who are in stay in place, getting restless, getting really concerned. Maybe you lost your job, you don't have income, you don't know how to provide for your family, you feel disempowered completely. There's arguments going on potentially at home, or maybe you're just having a great time, and you're like, hey, this is awesome. It's a permanent vacation. Wherever you are in the spectrum, I think this conversation is going to really provoke you into some new realizations. And, that's my favorite thing. So it's going to be one of my favorite interviews. So today I have Ken Cervera with us. Welcome, Ken.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. So Ken is a resilience coach with over 5 years of experience helping young adults and parents to remain grounded in their purpose. As the host of the Own Your Truth podcast, his mission is to highlight the dark lessons of life and how we can use these difficult moments as fuel for growth and success. That just is exactly what we need right now.
Mm.
After an immensely isolating period in his late 20s when he attempted to take his own life, and Ken, I'm right there with you. I've been in those
Mhm.
dark moments.
Mm.
Ken's path to recovery has become the driving force behind his movement of truth, vulnerability, and connection. And he does some work with the Good Men Project, which is such a beautiful organization, just trying to help men get their feet on the ground in a heart-centered, loving way, which, let's just face it, has not been the case. So,
Mhm.
Ken, welcome to
Yeah.
the show.
Thank you so much. Really excited to be here and have a chat with you.
I'm so excited about what we're going to talk about today. So tell us a little bit about your own journey through that darkness, because a lot of people might resonate with your story right now. They're going through some tough stuff. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got into that darkness and how you got through it, and what were some of the key highlights.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So the journey of that moment, a very difficult time in my life, for about 10 years, in my late 20s, it was difficult for me. I struggled with a lot of things, purpose, identity, in terms of my contribution to the world, feeling the pressure to live a certain lifestyle, expectations post-graduation in college, just trying to align everything I had studied and thought I wanted to be as an adult, quote unquote, and seeing this sort of untangle in my late 20s where I started to question all of that, just started to question what my talents were, where I belonged in the world, the kind of future and life I wanted to build for myself. And when I got into this very dark space, it was difficult. I think a lot of this it was just, again, I'm not talking about all male egos here. I'm talking about mine. Mine was very stubborn. I think I struggled a lot and I refused to ask for help. And that, looking back on those days, I realized that was my biggest fault. And it almost cost me my life because I did try to take my own life in a very contained, but also a very violent way, which would have caused a lot of damage to everyone I know and love. So I say that openly now. I mean, it's crazy that I'm sharing this part of my story so openly, but now that I've taken ownership of it, it's easier. Um, After that moment, I think it started to untangle or remove a lot of the barriers in my life, because I realized when you make a decision to do something so extreme, it it broadens your awareness. Like my vision changed, my understanding of who I was changed, and that was a very dark period in my life that was difficult for me to overcome. I mean, I kept it a secret for 10 years. No one knew about it. So I struggled with it in silence. And I think, I know this is a very dark note to start our interview on, but I think it's relevant to what's going on today, because as I started to work through this dark chapter in my life of about 10 years, what I started to realize was that everything that at one point was about to destroy me, or what I almost let destroy me, ended up becoming my greatest source of resilience and insight and compassion, love, and groundedness. And I think that's the reason that that moment was the reason I was ultimately able to connect with 10 years later my greater purpose, which was how do I keep people grounded, those who may be broken or lost and overwhelmed. How can I connect with them? Well, now it's very easy for me because I was broken, I was lost, and I was overwhelmed. And I think looking back on those 10 years of my life to where I am now as a father, right, in the midst of COVID-19, I've described the way I feel as this is going to sound really weird, but there's two kinds of people when the apocalypse comes. I think there are those who freak out, buy a bunch of toilet paper, start locking their doors, start
Totally.
start freaking out, start calling their family members who don't know what to do, projecting their fear outward. And then there's another individual, like people like me, who sit on their patio with an old fashioned and just sort of wait for the end, completely calm and completely grounded. And I use those two extremes as a way to explain how I've arrived out of my 10-year climb, which was, it was difficult for me. And the time it took me to resolve all of the hurt and the feeling of isolation and just disconnectedness, that was the source of my greatest strength. And it gives me a lot of clarity now in the midst of all this chaos to understand, like, nothing, no matter what comes from this point on, sincerely, nothing will ever be as difficult as that 10-year climb and the immediate moment that I tried to take my life. Nothing. So I use that moment as my fuel to sustain me and to help provide insight and keep my family grounded, to communicate with my son and say, hey, listen, there's this very scary thing that's going on. There's this virus. We just have to make sure we wash our hands. We can't see our friends and family for a little bit. We have to, these are the new rules of our life, you know. And then when I lose it and I lose my patience, which is very rare these days, but when I do, um, I know that my wife is there to ground me. And then when she loses hers, I know without a doubt that I'm there to ground her. But I think the biggest lesson that I've taken from all of this is that, let's say my wife and I lose it together, at least we know at some point we will come back and focus on the bigger mission, which is keeping everybody whole and everybody calm and really just opening up and looking around, you know, for the moments that we wouldn't have been able to have if this crisis wasn't happening right now. There's a lot of moments that I'm blessed to actually experience. Like this morning, I played with my son for an extra hour in our garden because I could. You know, I had the time to do so. And normally he'd be at school. My wife would be at work, but instead she was able to get in a quick workout, you know, while I was watching our son. So there's chaos going on right now. And one of the things I encourage everyone to do is to just embrace this COVID-19 moment as your dark teacher, because we're going to have a lot of them throughout the course of our life. This is not going to be the last one. It's just in a different fashion than any of us expected. Um, I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. And that definitely drives with messages I get from my own higher guidance that, you know, I also tune into a lot of indigenous people who share prophecies. And,
Mm,
you know, that this is the time that Pachamama, Mother Earth, is waking us up. And this was
yeah.
the gentle path. So I know a lot of people think, oh, well, so-and-so created this virus and is this biological and warfare and all this kind of, you know, there's all this kind of stuff out there in the conspiracy theories. And I do check it out. I listen to it. But at
Mm,
the biggest picture, we're all part of Pachamama, every one of us. Nobody here is not part of Pachamama.
Yeah.
We're all part of the earth, so we're all part of earth consciousness. So therefore earth consciousness operated through some individuals to potentially create and distribute something that would then affect the rest of us individuals. So
Mm-hmm.
we're all part of the earth consciousness. So at the bottom line is Mother Earth's waking us up.
Mm.
This was the gentle
Mm.
tossing of the tennis ball across the net.
Mm-hmm.
This is the gentle path. It doesn't look
Totally.
gentle,
No.
but this is the gentle path, and it
Yeah.
will get less gentle if we don't listen, so this is,
Mm.
I love that you called it a dark teacher. I've also learned from dark moments like that. So how do you, I feel like resistance is one of the things that keeps us from learning from the dark teacher, like trying to make it different than it is or not accepting the way it is. How do you cope with, like, how do you turn that dark teacher into a powerful lesson and wisdom for yourself, into a gift?
Um, right now, and then everything I experienced 10 years ago, it's all cumulative, right? It's added up to what I call sort of just a daily awareness and insight. So one of the things I do to really just listen to those moments, even if they're as little as me getting defensive with my wife about something she may have said to me, it can be as small as that, And I think what I do is immediately go internal and ask myself, am I responding to what's actually going on in front of me or what I think is going on? And there's a big distinction between the two, right?
Explore that a little bit more. Yeah, because this is really good stuff.
Yeah. So like, let's say, for example, right now we can make a choice to explore what we think is actually going on. The apocalypse, the collapse of the economy, potential riots, fear, news being distributed across the globe about how bad this thing is. But when you actually think about your life and what's really going on, we have a conscious choice um, to respond to things in a certain way. And that's really ultimately the only thing we have control over, right? Is how we respond to something. And that response is going to either make the situation worse or it's going to help. It's going to do something to provide more clarity and more insight. And that's one of the most difficult things to do when we're experiencing fear or anger or frustration or stress. Like trying to be clear about our next response is very difficult when the brain is on fire and we're angry, we're upset, we're afraid. It's just muddying the water of the decision we need to make. So something that's been helping me to really embrace all these dark moments and challenges is just to ask that simple question. Am I responding to what is actually going on or what I think is going on? And every time I meet myself at that intersection, I remind myself, just sort of like a mantra, like to get connected with the emotions of my future versus the emotions of my past. Because
And
it's, yeah,
I don't think you're suggesting to put your head in the sand and not be aware.
no, yeah, not at all. Like this is just the opposite. What I recommend or what's been helping for me is to really just look at what's going on in front of me. Just simply observe and just remove my ego from the equation. That's very difficult to do. It's not an easy thing to do at all, and that's been a constant daily challenge for me to try and balance this in the midst of all this quote unquote chaos we're going through. A perfect example is there's been a difficult conversation that I didn't want to have with my wife, and I knew it was going to cause stress. We're going to get into an argument about it, and I held on to it for almost a month.
That's a long time to hold on to something you need to talk about. And how many
Yeah.
people out there can resonate with that? Are you doing that right now? Fess
Mm-hmm.
up,
And
fess up.
yeah, like this, I'm gonna fess up with both hands. Like I'm guilty every day, and this is what I mean about this constant battle of awareness. Because like in my brain, I go to, well, we're all contained in this space. My job as a husband and a father is to not create more tension and stress. So what I'm going to do is hold on to this for the benefit of avoiding an argument and creating more stress. But then what's interesting is that it manifests in different ways. So this is sort of where the awareness comes into play. It's like the first week of me holding on to these emotions, I noticed something strange, like a pain in my lower back. I was like, what did I do? Was I deadlifting weird? Did I injure myself when I was working out? Nothing I did physically would have caused an injury in my body. But what it was is these stuck emotions. And I firmly believe this, that we hold onto emotions in our body. And it manifests as I lose patience with my son. I start subconsciously creating arguments with my wife because this energy needs a way to escape. So if I can argue about it, then that'll be one way. Maybe I can have the conversation then. Until finally it all busted loose where we're on the couch and my wife was like, can we just please talk about what's going on, because you're being silent and you're kind of being an asshole right now. And so finally we talked about it, and I kid you not, almost instantly the pain went away, my shoulders just sort of relaxed, and I was clear-headed again. So another cue for anybody who's in the midst of all this is to not hold on to stuff for the sake of containing your environment. Your environment demands that you use it effectively, that you let it go, that you work with your partner and your family members to actually communicate. Because if we contain the emotions, as well as isolate ourselves, as well as refusing to see our friends, we can't see our friends and family, everything is heightened right now. Every aspect of our emotional, spiritual, mental journey is on pins and needles. It's already there. So what we need to do is really do our best to communicate openly and honestly and be vulnerable. Like if you're afraid right now about your financial situation, about your job, about your future, like talk. I mean, we don't want to hold on to that fear anymore. We can't afford to. Because
And
it's
also,
gonna,
but
yeah,
don't ruminate, you know. So
yeah,
that's because I did talking on the couch for 20 years, weekly psychotherapy, Ken.
yeah.
I'm
I
a
mean,
good talker.
so I mean, the journey, right?
Yeah. And a lot of women have learned that. They've learned to talk it out, right? To talk about things and to spin around in the story. And
Mm,
so what I like to do now is like tell enough of the story to get the emotion triggered and then stay in the emotion. Like don't leave the
yeah.
be with the emotion, let it expand as big as it wants to get, just stay present with it. You know, if it's anger, you might want to move the energy by stomping your feet or, you know,
Hmm.
probably not a good idea right now because a lot of people would get freaked out, but I like to roar like a lion. Like I'll go off in my car
Yeah.
and roar, you know, if I'm really pissed off, you know, just roar, you know,
Yeah.
just like let it out.
That's a good
Um,
one. I've done that before. It's really helpful.
I feel like the whole family can get together on roaring and it can be like a fun thing, you know, it doesn't have to be so like dire. That it's
Oh,
just
it
an
is.
emotional experience. That's all it is, right? I mean, it's just emotion.
It's
It's
just
a
honor
temporary
it.
thing.
And you brought up a great point about roaring. Like we started to recently, some friends of ours introduced us to how they calm their kiddo down a little bit is they bring a pillow up and they're like scream into the pillow. So we all started trying this at home. Like my son would do it, I would do it, my wife would do it for two reasons. One, we let the emotion out. But two, we don't want to freak out our neighbors and have to be like, what the hell's going on next door? But
The whole
yeah, that's
family's going crazy.
these guys are losing it. It's the Walking Dead situation going on here. But that's been helpful because we ended up laughing. You
Yeah.
know, you're gonna find that these moments of release or just being silly, being a little bit crazy, making it a game has been incredibly helpful. That's been really good to just embrace a lot of this darkness that's going on, trying these little things bit by bit, just and not feeling so bad if it doesn't work. I think there's a lot of pressure right now, especially as parents, to be everyone's going to be on top of their game, right? We can't mess up. We got to show our kids that we can make it through this. And it's like, no, this is, if you're afraid, let your children see you cry. Let them see your fear. Because I think one of the worst things, or one of the most difficult things any child can try to get over as they're developing, as their brains are developing, is this notion that their parents are perfect. I think kids need to see us be flawed, make mistakes, take ownership of those mistakes, and talk about solutions moving forward. I've That was one of the biggest things that my wife and I had a discussion about, was how are we going to communicate in the midst of all this so that the narrative we're sharing with our son is true, it's real. Like we're not sheltering him from the truth. We're just giving him proactive insight into the stressful moments that are going to occur, and we're apologizing in advance for stuff. Like, hey, daddy's got no patience today. I just saw 6 patients at the clinic. I'm exhausted. I need like 30 minutes, Cole, before I start like wrestling with you. Maybe I need like a little drink to just calm down today. Like there's these little things where he's seeing us be flawed, human, vulnerable, afraid, strong, all in the same day. So I think providing that contrast for our kids is going to be more important now than ever before. you know?
Absolutely. And it's kind of like, I feel I've noticed in my first marriage for 20 years, I noticed that we were playing the right and wrong game.
Mm,
Oh gosh, that is a difficult game. So
mm,
that game right now is going to be very challenging. If you're cooped up with somebody playing the right and wrong game right now, that's a difficult one. I was on the receiving end of like, you must be wrong because you're emotional and therefore you're incorrect.
mm-hmm,
And I think that's a game that's played a lot out here, is like denying the power and the truth that's held in emotional experience, and
mm-hmm,
dismissing it as if it's crazy or it's imbalanced or it's incorrect because it's not logical and from the brain.
mm,
Did you face this in your own journey as a man? Like, because I find this from men a lot, like kind of like dismiss what I'm saying because I say it in a passionate way.
yep.
Not my current husband, because he knows better. But
Yep,
but
totally,
he
yeah.
talks about the imbalanced masculine. He has a much more, he's got more of a grip on his or access to his emotional experience in his feminine. He's got more
Mm-hmm,
access to that. Even though he's a totally martial arts, he's a badass. He can totally
mm-hmm,
really, fight because he's
mm-hmm,
career martial artist.
mm,
But he doesn't do that. He knows how to manage energy. He knows how
mm-hmm,
to access his inner awarenesses and things.
mm. Well,
So
oh, sorry, yeah, didn't mean to cut you off.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
do you agree with that? Like, what are your thoughts from a man's perspective on the dismissal of emotional energy that kind of tends to happen sometimes with men and women? They're just missing, oh, just because you're emotional, it must be inaccurate. Where does that come from? Speaking on
Uh,
behalf of yourself, and you can't possibly speak on
yes.
behalf of all mankind.
Thank you for preempting that. This is just my opinion.
Just your opinion?
Just me, just one man's opinion here. But I can tell you where it comes from for me. I think a lot of, especially now with my wife and I, I'm actively trying to really, really on a daily basis raise my level of awareness of my reaction versus the solution. Those are the longest distances between 2 points right now. And the reaction, the immediate response, I think this comes from, my male ego, which is at times completely out of control, where I'm just hyper defensive. And anybody that even slightly suggests that I've made a mistake or corrects me, that's a trigger for me. So it's like a lot of times, like I know that's my button, and I feel like my wife is constantly pushing it. But that's where the narrative is wrong, where I think everything gets heightened, especially now that we're in this state. But from my perspective as a man, I think it comes from the early days of maybe struggling in school with attention issues or actually hearing. I had severe ear issues as a kid where a lot of times I couldn't hear my teachers when they would ask me questions. So I'd respond with what I thought they were saying. And it's rooted in some very deep childhood sort of struggling in school, getting the answer wrong in front of the class, kind of all that stuff. So it's rooted in a past experiences for me, where it's become part of my framework, I think, during my developmental years. And now as a man, I make it a point to make sure I do everything right, where I don't make mistakes. And the minute anybody calls me out on it, it's going to be an issue, or I feel myself getting defensive almost as a natural instinct. So a perfect example of sort of where this comes from and how it manifests is actually the other day, my wife, I was busy making coffee, feeding my son, also trying to get him dressed. And then my wife came into the kitchen and was like, "Hey, are you done with these crackers?" My brain went to, my wife is calling me out that I left something on the counter and it needs to be put back, in the middle of me trying to do all this other stuff. Like, when is it enough? So that one simple comment was enough to just like, we kind of had like a mini argument about it. She had to stop me and calm me down and be like, "Hey, bro, I'm just asking if you need some help here." So to answer your question, I think a lot of this stuff, at least for me, came from early developmental stuff. Struggling in school, really having some learning issues in terms of auditory. I just couldn't hear, so there was a delay in my learning experience. And then growing up and never really doing the deep work around that and really just forgiving myself, because I think a lot of this anger it's stuff that gets stuck and it becomes a part of our environment on a daily basis. So our identity is wrapped around this idea of How do I avoid these moments from happening? How do I avoid getting called out for my mistakes, or what I perceive to be me getting called out for my mistakes, when in reality it's just one person communicating with another? And in marriage, when my wife is trying to communicate or even help me, there's moments where she's talked about she feels like she's walking on eggshells. That's when I know there's something wrong internally with me that I'm not paying attention to. And my ego is trying to point me in all kinds of directions. Like, this is the reason why she's wrong, because I put out the trash 5 times this week, but she called me out on the laundry that wasn't done. So it's like
Yeah.
the imbalance of perception versus communication can be stirred up in so many different ways. And I think for for me, there's a lot of different triggers around it. Again, I can't speak for all men here, but I do know a lot of times it's heightened, right? Because the male ego is a very fragile thing. It's going to fight back. It's going to be angry. It's going to convince other people that they're wrong, even though they may be right. Um, I think that's just a part of at least my construct. I'm not going to say ours as men. That's just me. So that's been a constant battle for me. And I just accept that it's never going to go away. Really, the only thing I can do is just raise my awareness of it and try to reach my higher self, which is saying, hey, just calm down, listen, don't react. You know?
Yeah, I love that. Calm down, listen, don't react, and then see like where are the points of connection in your own psychology. And this is the deep space. This is the feminine, people. Like, this is how my mind thinks about the feminine, is that it's the deep space below your mind. It's like everything below your
Mm,
mind.
yeah.
It's all the subconscious, it's all the early programming, it's the memories, it's the decisions we made before we knew we were making decisions. Like, we didn't even know we
Mm-hmm.
were deciding about that. We just saw the programming and we like, oh, that's the way it is because I'm a sponge, like,
Mm-hmm.
this is how
Yeah.
it is. What's so interesting is that I think that people, this whole knight in shining armor thing that women have been conditioned to, men have been conditioned to that too. So I
Totally.
just want to reveal that for this moment. Let's talk about the experience of the knight in shining armor from the man's perspective.
Mm, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. Um, I think for years I wore that identity. Um, I mean, that was me. That was that was who I was. That was the way I grew up. I was raised by both incredibly loving parents who set a powerful example for me about what it meant to be a gentleman, what it meant to be respectful of women, what it meant to listen, what it meant to struggle with the male ego. Um, I think I was just genetically predispositioned to be a protector, to be a guide, I think. And that's something that a lot of my mom would tell me throughout school. I don't, some of this I don't even remember, was that some of the kids who were being bullied in my younger class, I always stood up for them. I was the protector of those kiddos, the protector of my sister. Um, so I think for me, the knight in shining armor was was very much a part of my construct. I mean, this is evolution, right? Men are supposed to protect and provide. I think for me, it went a little bit deeper than that, where I took on what I've always felt for the majority of my life, and this is a habit that I know I have, is taking on the weight of the world on my
Mm.
shoulders. I think a lot of maybe young men and husbands struggle with that as well, especially when you have your first kid. Where it's like, oh my God, my first thought was, how am I going to keep my son alive, right? what do I
Yeah.
what do I have to do to not mess this moment up or this kid up? So I think it's a very heavy burden that I think maybe a lot of men struggle with, because to gnaw at that identity a little bit is scary, because then we have to redefine who we are, and we have to get in touch with that feminine energy of being um, sensitive, being a listener, putting the ego aside, being nurturing. And I think a lot of men, I won't say a lot of men, let me just go, let me rephrase me. What I struggled with was how to balance those two in the same embodiment of like my identity. Because in order for me to be nurturing, I'd have to be vulnerable. And I can't protect the people in my life if I'm vulnerable. And it wasn't until I grew older and understood that vulnerability was my greatest strength. So for me, like, it's a great, you're asking me this question at a really pivotal moment in my life, where I think I now fully understand vulnerability really is strength, right? Like, if we can't be brave without fear, We can't be strong without weakness. And I think the knight in shining armor construct is something that was really a burden for me for the majority of my life. It's the thing that prevented me from asking for help. And it did almost cost me my life. So I think not a lot of men have the benefit of that experience where something needs to shake them loose and raise their level of awareness, like, oh, this is damaging. And then again, what the dangerous thing about the knight in shining armor construct is that once I started to feel a certain amount of pain and suffering, suddenly it became a contest to see how long I could control that narrative and absorb it as part of who I was. Because
Mm.
if I was to let go of that at a later age, on a certain level, that would mean I gave up my identity, that I quit, that I wasn't strong. So it's interesting because once I let go, the construct took on a whole different meaning for me. Like my new knight in shining armor construct is the father who shows up, does his best to put his phone down and be fully engaged with his son. It's the next time I have an argument with my wife, I will sort of quiet my internal bully, just turn the volume down and actually just listen, even though I know what she's saying is really pissing me off and I'm exhausted and I'm not in the place to hear it. I know that in those moments where I struggle profoundly to hear the message that she's saying, that is me growing, that is me getting stronger. Like that is what's needed more than shining armor. I think for me, it's just setting a bright example of what it means to be a father and a husband and a friend and a brother, you know?
Yeah, that vulnerable partnership. I noticed in my own marriage that we got along really great while I was, putting him in the knight in shining armor, right,
Yeah.
role. And then as soon as I had my first baby, everything changed inside of me.
Mm,
Like
mm,
everything changed. And I went into a deep, deep dark because I had a lot of early childhood trauma. And what I know about that is that the birth experience can really raise up to the surface all the traumas that you've had as a child yourself. It raises it
yeah.
all up to the surface, and you got to deal with it. And I was
Mm,
going through that, and I was going through like just this upheaval of like, wait a second, I'm not a dumb blonde, like, okay, like I don't even like that term. I'm
yeah.
actually a smart woman. I'm actually I have these new awakened senses within me because of the birth, that I know things. Like I know things about my child. I know what my child needs. I just know it. I know it in my body. I can feel it. And now that I know that, don't dismiss me, and that
Mm,
was the beginning of a lot of arguments about how to parent, because he didn't seem to be connected that same way. He didn't seem to have that same
mm,
knowing. Have you had that kind of experience?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually a really, really great insight because I think that's the first 2 years of our son being born. That's what I struggled with. Is it immediately brought up the anything that was unresolved, right? Or that I've experienced, the past traumas, the hurts, and what what my parenting style, it was almost like subconscious. I just was very defensive with my son at moments, like trying to correct a lot of his mistakes. And I knew it's rooted in me trying to, on some level, have him avoid the mistakes of my past. But then a lot of what I perceived as me being my kind of parenting style was actually unhealthy to what my wife was trying to do, which was, and again, this is where the whole male ego thing came into play, where it's like I couldn't accept the fact that she may have something to share with me that is not better than an idea or an approach that I have, but is actually more rooted in what's actually going on versus what I think is going on. So there was a lot of those struggles going on where I would get easily frustrated with my son because he was triggering my ego. And I was like, just pick up your own damn Legos. My wife was like, maybe we got to try a different approach. And then there were equally on the opposite side of that coin moments where my wife would get sort of hyper organized with his toys and be like, Cole, why can't you clean up your room fast enough? And I'm like, babe, just give him 20 minutes to just play. If he's 20 minutes late for bed, it's not going to be the end of the world. What he needs is to have some peaceful sleep. Let's just walk out of the room right now. Let him figure it out. So there was a lot of battling going on in the beginning years about whose approach was right, what's the best way to say something? When is it time to, God forbid, to like smack our child on the butt? That's a lot of the stuff we struggle with, is like, we don't want to physically ever hit our child. But there are moments as parents where you just lose it. So then we go down this rabbit hole and we're like, oh my God, we're abusing our kid. It's like, no, we're human. Sometimes we have no patience left. And I know that, again, this is a lot of what we struggle with as parents, is how much to let these moments of weakness overtake us, where maybe we slam a door, maybe we smack our son on the butt, or maybe we yell, right? Sometimes my wife has more patience than I do, and sometimes it's the opposite. So there's a lot of that battling going on, especially the first few years of our son being born. Like, oh, what's the right way to raise this kid? Yeah.
There's a
So
lot of that. I'm sure that there's a lot going on out there for everybody listening in right now as well.
yeah.
Being cooped up with your family could be really joyful if you've kind of, know how to navigate it and have worked out some of these issues. But if you're haven't, it could be also really pretty
Mm,
intense, challenging time.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
what's like one skill or tool that you've learned to help you, um, you know, get out of a tense moment and get back into some clarity? What's
Mm.
one thing you could share that really helps you?
So it's a perfect example, right? Like the other day, it was just such a horrible morning. Like, I was running late, trying to do 5 things at once: cook breakfast, make coffee, make my lunch, feed the cat, get my son dressed so my wife could sleep in late because she had a late night. And I lost my patience. And as I was leaving, um, I just had to leave the house. I had to get out. So I just took a deep breath and was like, and in this moment, I looked at my wife and she responded very interestingly, which we had a big argument about it later. She started to say, like, that's not helping. And in that moment, what I realized was that if I start showing signs of stress, she's immediately going to be more stressed out. So I started to think, man, I can't even take a deep breath in my own home. This is my central nervous system trying to calm itself down. I can't edit this. I don't know how to do that.
Mm.
So I had this discussion with my wife and said, babe, when I get upset again, I'm going to take a deep breath. There's nothing I can do to edit that. You're just going to have to be okay and understand it's not anger. It's just me trying to calm down. So what she said in return was very interesting. She's like, I get that. I understand. And I know it's my fault that I let it stress me out too much. But what would help is if during those moments, we explain to our son, hey, buddy, this is daddy taking a deep breath just so he can calm down and relax, because right now his patience is done. He doesn't know what else to do. So there's 2 things there, which is, if you're going to lose your patience, obviously lose it, then explain afterwards what you're doing to get it back, and use the stressful moment as a teaching moment for anybody in the room that is going to be responding to that energy. Because this is really it. Like, any moment of stress is a teaching moment. And that's another thing that's really helpful, is look at all the stressful stuff that happens right now as a teaching moment. Communicate really well. Like, as parents, that's been the biggest struggle for me, is telling my son, hey bro, I need to walk away from you right now because I don't have any more patience. You can yell and scream, but just don't punch me in the balls. Don't grab my leg.
Yeah,
Because that happens a
ground
lot. Pardon
rules.
my French. Just stay away. But be open and honest. Even if you think your kids are still too young, just explain to them what's going on. Because I think what both my wife and I have experienced is that the process of explaining and communicating to them why we're upset gives them a deeper understanding about how their behavior impacts us. But also, they're going to go inward and they're going to remember these tools and
Mm.
think, how did mommy and daddy calm down in this situation? So there's a lot of moments now that I'd encourage parents, or anybody really, if you're in a relationship or just in a stressful time with roommates, doesn't matter, it's the same rules that you can try to apply, which is just connect, just share openly what you're stressed out about and what you're going to do to calm down, and what your needs are. A lot of times we just leave the room without resolving anything, and we're not letting the other person know, like, hey, I'm going to get in my car. I'm probably going to drive away and skid the curb a little bit. I'm going to yell like a lion, but I'm okay. I'm just going to drive around the block. I'm going to come back and calm down because that's what I need. So I think a lot of that's expressing what our needs are, how we can navigate the situation better, and just communicate with the people in our lives. So,
I love that. Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I just want to encourage people to stay in that moment. You know, it's so uncomfortable. But if you can be with yourself, just like you're suggesting, Ken, like when you have that moment of like right before you're going to pop, you know, where
mhm.
the energy gets really, really big, is it just sequester yourself and be with that energy. Just be like, okay, I'm being with the energy, really pissed
Mm,
off, and just let it, ah, you
totally.
know. And then
Yeah.
if you're the person who's watching your person get like that, back away. Just
Yeah.
let them, like, don't
Just,
don't lean in, back away. Let them have
yes.
that.
That is some great insight right there. Because the last thing you want to do is heighten the experience. And it's like we can't meet that level of energy with more, or just saying, but wait, I'm just trying to like calm
No,
down. No, no, it's not going to help.
it
Like
doesn't. It makes it worse
it
because then you're
makes it,
denying, you're invalidating the experience. So
yeah, it's like honor and just say, like, I see you're
there it
upset.
is.
I'm sorry that what I said upset you. I'm just going to take a step back and let you know I'm here for you. We're all in this together. So, like, words of reassurance and acknowledgement, that's going to be helpful. I mean, look, it all boils down to this, right? I think all of us have three basic human needs, now more so than ever. It's to be seen, it's to be heard, it's to be understood.
Hmm.
And that is going to be a constant journey every day, because we're going to be constantly trying to navigate how much does my family need to see of me struggling, or hear of me, or understand the real stress that's going on underneath that I'm trying to keep hidden. And then what do I need my partner to respond to? What do I need from them? What are my needs? It's a daily up and down, you know. And I think one of the biggest things I experienced in the midst of all this, to sort of put a nice little summary on all of the stuff we're talking about, is that there was a moment where we're literally watching our son absolutely destroy our front yard. He is throwing dirt everywhere. He's getting dirt on his face. He's just playing in mud, you know, and I think that's okay. Like, just there are going to be moments of complete chaos as parents that we're going to have a need to try and fix. But as long as no one's getting hurt, no one's getting injured, and if the house becomes a mess, it's going to be well worth just letting that stuff happen, cleaning up the mess later, to allow the space for chaos to happen. You know, everyone's version of chaos looks different. For my wife, it's like when shit gets thrown everywhere. For me, it's like when I hold on to stuff too much and it starts to bubble and bubble and bubble. But have those moments of decompression in your life where maybe you just sit on your couch or your patio and just make fart noises, watch a little bit more TV than you're supposed to, um, make a mess that you can clean up. Like, we need to allow for mess and chaos to happen in little tiny pockets in our home and our life, and just laugh at it, because that's really all it is. It's just a chaotic moment. It's not your life. It's just a moment in your life, you know?
Yeah, we are having, you know, we're having a big challenge, a big up level on the planet of self-mastery, and this is giving us a chance to work on that. And if you're here on the planet at this time, then you chose it. So
Yeah.
just stop resisting it and just lean into it and just go, okay,
Yeah.
well, this is here for me. It's going to teach me
Totally.
something. Well, so thank you so much for all the wonderful insights you shared today on our
Thank you.
interview. Very helpful. I'm going to go ahead and publish this one a little early just because I think it would serve a lot of people who are probably at their wits' end with this stay in place, and give a little
Yeah.
extra support.
Thank you. And, you know, honestly, like, um, if anybody, and this is something that I always share, it's like, please, I encourage people just to reach out to me. Um, I know it's an odd concept that you can maybe see someone or hear someone in a podcast and then send an email, or book a free session with them for some clarity and calm. But I really encourage people to do that. I'm donating my time right now to have 30-minute clarity and calm sessions with people. They can just book them directly on my website, on the clarity and calm link. I'm not throwing that out there as like a shameless plug. It's just when I was at the point in my life when I was like at my wit's end, I wish I knew that there were tools out there to just kind of just keep me grounded. So that's just something I wanted to share
No,
as
it's
well.
beautiful. Thank you for offering that. And I
Yeah.
will put the link to that on in the show notes so people can access that. And
Yeah.
then of course your podcast is another entry point. People can listen to the Own Your Truth podcast, which is on iTunes, right?
Yeah, we're on iTunes and Spotify, and you can find us at Own Your Truth Podcast on Instagram as well. You don't have to listen in any particular order. Just scroll through. I was recently interviewed by Daniel Mangena, and he had a great way to describe the podcast experience for Own Your Truth. He's like, just flip up and down, whatever one catches your eye or your ear, and just click it and start listening. So that's the way I'd encourage people to just absorb it, and dive in. So,
It's gorgeous. And I'm going to be on there too. So I'm excited to share
yes.
messages from White Eagle.
Yes,
Very
I
hummingbird.
cannot wait for that. It's going to be so exciting.
It's so
Oh man.
exciting. Well, thank you so much, Ken, for coming on the show. Definitely, you guys reach out to him if you're feeling resonant with Ken and you like his energy and like you feel like God, he's really going to get what you have to say. Don't hesitate. There's no. It's not. Are you going to try and hook people into something on that call?
No, and
No, you're just
honestly,
going to
like
talk to them, right?
if they never call me ever again, it's like, look, I'll be honest with you. If I never make a single dollar from my podcast, I'm cool with that. Like this is just about offering up my time and providing some tools in that 30 minutes. If they do want to keep talking to me, yes, that's a different story. Just, but the intention isn't to upsell or to just do anything salesy. It's just to connect. That's all.
Yeah, and I wanted to clarify that because I already know that from reading your energy and the conversations we've had. But I
Yeah.
like to bring people's concerns up because not everyone is as psychic as I am yet.
Yeah.
Yet, I want to
It's
use
a
the word
practice.
yet. It's coming. It's coming, and this is how we get there, right, Ken? This is how we get there. It's how we tune into our bodies, we tune into our senses, we start to feel things, we admit we don't know everything, and we step off that knight in shining armor horse, and we just become a person beside
Yeah,
another person, and we help each other.
totally. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. So I hope that you have a beautiful day. And everybody out there, if you enjoyed this podcast and you got some help from it, please share it out. You can copy the link. You can share it right from iTunes. You can give people the web address at soulnectar.show to watch it. You can just share it out, give an iTunes rating. This is how iTunes figures out what content's helpful. And if you found this helpful, well, then give it a good rating and a comment. And I'm going to give kisses. So here they come. You want to help me with kisses, Ken?
Yeah.
Here they come. They're COVID free because they're electronic. Here they come, people. Love you,
Sending them out.
people.
Thank you so much, Carrie. This is amazing. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Have a good
Thank
week,
you.
everybody. Bye for now.